In the shadowy corridors of Egypt's state archives, there exists a peculiar silence. For a man who allegedly brought the world's mightiest empire to its knees through divine plagues, freed hundreds of thousands of slaves, and caused the catastrophic loss of an entire army in the Red Sea, Moses leaves virtually no trace in Egyptian records. This absence isn't just curious, it's historically explosive. How does a figure so monumental in biblical narrative become a ghost in the very civilization where his story unfolds? The biblical Moses, architect of nations according to biblical accounts. Moses didn't merely escape Egypt, he systematically dismantled it. Born during a period of Hebrew oppression, hidden in bulrushes, and raised in Pharaoh's own palace, Moses represents perhaps history's most dramatic case of insider-turned-revolutionary. The Torah presents him as a prince who murdered an Egyptian overseer, fled to Midian, encountered God in a burning bush, and returned to Egypt armed with divine authority and his brother Aaron as spokesman. What follows reads like ancient geopolitical warfare. 10 plagues systematically target Egypt's religious and economic foundations. The Nile turns to blood, attacking Hapi, the river god. Frogs swarm the land, mocking Heket, the frog goddess. Livestock die in mass devastating Egypt's wealth. And finally, the death of every firstborn son, striking at the very heart of Egyptian succession. The narrative climaxes with the parting of the Red Sea and the drowning of Pharaoh's army and military. Disaster so complete, it should have echoed through Egyptian annals for centuries. Yet here's where the mystery deepens. Egyptian historical records, meticulous in documenting military campaigns, natural disasters, and dynastic changes, maintain an almost supernatural silence about these events. The Egyptian perspective. A civilization's selective memory. Egyptian civilization is built on cosmic order and truth. Their historical records, carved in stone and written on papyrus, obsessively documented everything from successful military campaigns to the annual flooding of the Nile. They recorded defeats, though often reframed as strategic victories, natural disasters, and even periods of internal chaos like the intermediate periods. They documented foreign rulers, conquered peoples, and diplomatic marriages with neighboring kingdoms. So where is Moses? Some scholars point to tantalizing fragments. The Egyptian priest Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, tells of a priest named Osar-Sef who led a rebellion of lepers and unclean people, eventually changing his name to Moses. The Admonitions of Ipwar, an ancient Egyptian text, describes a period of chaos remarkably similar to the biblical plagues. The river is blood, the land is not light, and references to social upheaval where servants become masters. But these connections remain frustratingly circumstantial. The dating dilemma. When did Moses live? Asterisk, asterisk, here's where the plot thickens dramatically. Asterisk, asterisk, biblical chronology suggests Moses lived during the 13th century BCE, potentially during the reigns of Seti I and Ramesses II pharaohs, who left behind massive monuments and detailed records. Ramesses II in particular documented everything from his breakfast preferences to minor skirmishes with Bedouin tribes, yet no mention of Hebrew slaves, miraculous plagues, or a massive exodus appears in his extensive records. Alternative theories place Moses during the Second Intermediate Period, 1650 to 1550 BCE, when Egypt was actually ruled by foreign Semitic peoples called the Hyksos. This period saw genuine upheaval and the eventual expulsion of foreign rulers, events that might have been remembered and reinterpreted in Hebrew oral tradition. Archaeological evidence from this period shows abandoned settlements in the Nile Delta and population movements that could correlate with mass migration. Others suggest an even earlier date, connecting Moses to the collapse of the Old Kingdom around 2200 BCE, a period of genuine catastrophe involving climate change, famine, and social revolution. Archaeological silence. The missing exodus. Modern archaeology has revolutionized our understanding of the ancient world, uncovering evidence of mass migrations, urban destruction, and cultural transitions across the ancient Near East. We can trace the Sea People's movements through the Mediterranean, the Assyrian deportations, and even small-scale tribal movements through pottery shards and burial practices. But 600,000 Hebrew men plus their families, potentially 2 million people total, according to biblical numbers, wandering in the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years? Archaeological surveys of the Sinai have found virtually nothing from this period that could support such a massive population. No campsites, no pottery concentrations, no evidence of the enormous logistical infrastructure required to sustain such numbers in a harsh desert environment. This absence forces uncomfortable questions. Were the numbers symbolic rather than literal? Did the exodus occur in smaller waves over centuries rather than as a single mass migration? Or do we need to completely reconceptualize how we understand ancient historical narrative, the persistence of power? Why Moses matters despite these historical puzzles. Moses' influence on human civilization remains undeniable. His story becomes foundational not just to Judaism, but to Christianity and Islam. The legal principles attributed to him, the Ten Commandments, and broader Mosaic law influence legal systems to this day. The concept of liberation from oppression, central to the Exodus narrative, has inspired countless freedom movements, from the American Revolution to the Civil Rights Movement. Perhaps more intriguingly, the Moses narrative demonstrates how historical memory functions. Stories don't survive because they're historically accurate, they survive because they're historically necessary. Every oppressed people needs a Moses. Every tyrannical system needs an Exodus. Every wilderness has its promised land waiting beyond. The ultimate historical mystery, the Moses mystery, illuminates a fundamental tension in historical study: the relationship between historical fact and historical truth. Did a Hebrew prince raised in Pharaoh's court lead a massive slave rebellion and supernatural liberation? Probably not as described. Did Hebrew peoples leave Egypt in significant numbers during a period of upheaval, carrying with them powerful stories of divine deliverance that would shape human consciousness for millennia? Almost certainly. The most fascinating possibility remains largely unexplored. Asterisk. What if Egyptian records were deliberately purged? Ancient civilizations routinely practiced damnatio memorio, the systematic erasure of embarrassing or traumatic events from official records. A successful slave rebellion, the loss of a significant workforce, military humiliation, would constitute exactly the kind of events that prideful civilizations might choose to forget. In the end, Moses exists in the gap between history and memory, between what happened and what must have happened for the human story to make sense. He remains simultaneously the most important figure never documented and the most documented figure never proven it. Prophet who continues to lead humanity through wildernesses we still trying to understand, toward promised lands we're still struggling to envision. The search for the historical Moses ultimately becomes a search for how truth survives the collapse of empires, how hope persists through the silence of stones, and how the most powerful stories ever told remain forever, just beyond the reach of historical proof.